17. Black R&B legends who tragically lost their lovers. They sang about love, devotion, and forever. But behind the velvet voices and platinum records were shattered hearts, violent endings, and betrayals the public never saw coming. These 17 Black R&B legends didn't just lose their lovers, they lost themselves in the chaos of fame, addiction, and emotional destruction. What really happened behind the curtain? Whose story was the most devastating? Brace yourself, this isn't your typical love song. Before we dive into these chilling tales, make sure to subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence and hit the bell so you never miss the real stories behind the music you thought you knew. Al Green. In the golden age of 1970s soul, Al Green stood as the embodiment of passion, sensuality, and gospel-tinged elegance. With chart-topping tracks like Let's Stay Together and Tired of Being Alone, he enchanted millions and became an icon of romantic expression. But behind the tender lyrics and stage charisma lurked a private nightmare that nearly ended his life and career. In October 1974, everything unraveled inside his lavish Memphis home. His girlfriend, Mary Woodson White, had been struggling emotionally, deeply hurt by Green's refusal to commit and his womanizing behavior. Unknown to him, her heartbreak was festering into something deadly. While Green was in the bath, she silently entered the kitchen, boiled a pot of grits, and without warning stormed into the bathroom. She hurled the scalding contents onto his bare body, causing third-degree burns across his back, stomach, and arms. The agony was immediate and disfiguring. Moments later, the horror deepened. Woodson retrieved his handgun, went upstairs, and fatally shot herself. The house became a crime scene. The media exploded with headlines while police swarmed to uncover what led to such a horrific chain of events. What emerged was a tangled story of betrayal, mental distress, and emotional instability woven tightly around one of R&B's most magnetic figures. Physically, Al Green survived after an extended hospital stay and painful skin grafts. But emotionally, the trauma shattered his spirit. His confidence, relationships, and public persona were all shaken. In response, he began to withdraw from mainstream soul music, ultimately becoming an ordained minister and shifting his focus to gospel. The incident marked a permanent detour in his life's path. Though he would later return to secular music, the scars from that night, visible and invisible, would linger forever. For Al Green, the tragedy wasn't just about lost love, it was a brutal lesson in fame's fragility, the cost of neglect, and how unresolved heartbreak can erupt in irreversible devastation. Ray Charles. Ray Charles was a musical revolutionary, blind since childhood but unmatched in his ability to blend gospel, blues, and jazz into a style all his own. With hits like Georgia on My Mind and Hit the Road, Jackie captured America's ears and hearts. But while the spotlight adored him, the woman behind his chaotic ascent was left emotionally abandoned. In 1955, Charles married Della Beatrice Howard Robinson, a gentle and devoted woman who believed in his brilliance. Their union began with love and optimism, but as Ray's stardom ballooned, so did the chaos of his lifestyle. Touring, constantly surrounded by temptation and deep in the throes of heroin addiction, Charles's world was one of excess and secrecy. Della became a ghost in his world of late-night gigs and endless hotel rooms. Though she raised their 3 sons and managed the home front, she endured in silence as Ray fathered children with multiple other women, 12 children in total by 10 mothers. Della's heart fractured quietly over 2 decades, watching the man she married disappear behind sunglasses and needle tracks. His 1961 arrest for drug possession was a public embarrassment, but not enough to shake him from the spiral. Despite everything, Della stayed until 1977, when the years of betrayal finally overwhelmed her. Filing for divorce wasn't just an act of self-preservation, it was a declaration that her pain could no longer be hidden. After the separation, Ray remained a legend on stage, but was a solitary figure off it. He continued to battle demons until his passing in 2004. Della never sought revenge headlines or pity. Her strength was in her silence. But for those who knew their story, Her heartbreak was among the deepest in music history. Ray Charles may have played love songs like no other, but in the end he lost the only woman who had truly loved him through everything. Ike Turner. Ike Turner was a foundational force in the birth of rock and roll. Rocket 88 is widely considered one of the first rock records ever made, but his musical legacy is forever entangled with violence control and the destruction of one of R&B's most iconic marriages. In the early 1960s, Ike discovered a young singer named Anna Mae Bullock, soon to be known worldwide as Tina Turner. Their chemistry on stage was undeniable, their performances explosive. But privately, Tina was subjected to a life of torment. Ike's ambitions were coupled with paranoia, possessiveness, and drug-fueled aggression. He dictated not just Tina's career moves, but her appearance money and even diet. Behind closed doors, beatings were frequent, apologies non-existent. Tina attempted suicide in 1968 after one particularly brutal episode, only to survive and return to more abuse. But in 1976, after a violent hotel altercation in Dallas, she finally ran barefoot, bloodied, with 36 cents in her pocket and a gas card in her hand. Their divorce, finalized in 1978, left her with nothing but her name. Ike kept their shared assets, royalties, and even attempted to reclaim her identity. Yet Tina rebuilt stronger, more iconic than ever. Meanwhile, Ike spiraled further into drugs and obscurity. His later years were marked by arrests, addiction, and a failed attempt at redemption. Though he tried to mount a comeback and even won a Grammy in 2007, he died that same year, leaving behind a legacy torn between genius and abuse. Tina's memoir, I, Tina and the biopic, What's Love Got to Do With It, exposed the truth to a global audience. Ike's name became synonymous with domestic violence, an indelible stain that fame could never wash away. His tragedy wasn't just losing Tina. It was forfeiting respect, love, and a future that his own hands destroyed. James Brown, known as the godfather of soul, James Brown was more than an entertainer. He was a movement. With hits like I Got You, I Feel Good, and It's a Man's World, Brown revolutionized rhythm and stage performance. But behind the manic energy and commanding persona stood a man whose personal life often veered into turmoil. Brown married Deidre "Dee Dee" Jenkins in 1970. At first, the relationship seemed like a partnership of equals, strong, passionate, and driven. But as time passed, cracks widened. Brown's temper was unpredictable, his behavior fueled by stimulants and paranoia. The marriage, instead of becoming a refuge, turned into a battleground. By 1975, Dee Dee was hospitalized with serious injuries after a violent episode. Though Brown was arrested, the charges faded from headlines just as quickly as they appeared. Still, the violence didn't stop. Dee Dee finally ended the marriage in 1981 after 11 years of fear, tension, and isolation. But the pattern repeated itself. In the early 2000s, Brown married Tommy Ray Heine. Many believed age and time had mellowed him, but those hopes were short-lived. In 2004, he was arrested again, this time for allegedly assaulting Tommy with a chair. The incident barely made waves, dismissed by some as another eccentricity of the aging star. When Brown passed away in 2006, a legal firestorm erupted. Tommy Ray insisted she was his rightful widow, while Brown's children and estate claimed the marriage was never legally valid. Years of courtroom battles followed, staining the final chapter of his legacy. Though his music inspired millions, James Brown's legacy is complicated by his treatment of women. Two marriages, both fractured by physical harm and fear, left behind not only emotional ruins, but a lingering question. Can cultural greatness excuse personal darkness? Clarence Carter. Clarence Carter's voice carried a richness that wrapped audiences in Southern soul, raw, heartfelt, and unforgettable. His 1970 hit Patches became an anthem of perseverance, earning a Grammy and international acclaim. But offstage, Carter's private life was far less harmonious. In the mid-1960s, Clarence married Annette, a woman who supported him long before the limelight found him. At first, their bond was steady, rooted in shared dreams and quiet devotion. But fame often changes people, and Carter was no exception. As his career soared, he began drinking heavily. Performances turned into late-night parties, and tours became escape routes from responsibility. Annette started hearing whispers stories of other women, wild nights, and growing recklessness. He'd return home intoxicated, often unreachable emotionally. Fights erupted over loyalty, over broken promises, and over the widening emotional distance. Annette tried to hold on, hoping the man she married still lived beneath the fame-soaked exterior. By the late 1970s, the weight of betrayal and exhaustion became too much. The marriage dissolved quietly, without scandal, but with deep wounds. Clarence continued to record and perform his lyrics, still speaking of love and heartbreak, even as he left behind a woman emotionally drained and financially strained. What made the tragedy sting deeper was its silence. Unlike other public breakups, theirs happened without media frenzy. But within the soul music community, those close to the couple knew the cost of Clarence's choices. Annette had been more than a partner. She was the stability he lost chasing applause. Clarence Carter still tours occasionally, his music cherished by longtime fans. Yet behind the mic remains a man whose personal missteps unraveled the one relationship that once grounded his world. His voice may have moved nations, but at home it echoed through an empty room. Etta James. Etta James sang with the ferocity that could melt stone. At last, I'd rather go blind. Tell Mama her voice was thunderous, sultry, and unforgettable. Yet behind that signature growl lay a lifetime of personal chaos that nearly consumed her and the man who tried to love her through it. In 1969, James married Artis Mills. He wasn't from the limelight, but he had grit, believing his love could anchor the storm. Unfortunately, the storm had a name: heroin. Etta's descent into addiction wasn't sudden, but once it took root, it strangled everything. Recording sessions were missed. Shows were canceled. Her body and mind began to break. The most heartbreaking twist came in 1972 when both Etta and Artis were arrested for narcotics possession. In a stunning act of loyalty, Artis accepted the prison sentence on her behalf, believing she needed another chance at life more than he did. He served over a year in jail while Etta struggled to keep herself afloat outside. But love can't cure addiction. Even after his release, the marriage limped along through cycles of rehab, relapse, and emotional distance. Artis remained silent, patient, worn down, but the woman he married continued to disappear one needle at a time. Their bond was never officially severed, but what they once shared was no longer recognizable. Etta's erratic behavior, public meltdowns, and multiple hospitalizations drained them both. Her stardom flickered back in the 1980s, but the scars were permanent. When Etta passed away in 2012, she was revered as a legend, but few remembered the man who took the fall for her crimes, who stood by her during withdrawals and court dates, who watched his wife fade away while the world applauded her voice. Etta James lost her way to addiction, but Artis Mills lost her too, piece by piece, while trying to hold on to someone who was no longer there. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye had a voice so smooth it could seduce the wind. From What's Going On to Sexual Healing, his songs made him the soul of an era. Yet even as millions adored him, he managed to devastate the one woman who gave him everything: Anna Gordy, his wife of over a decade and sister to Motown founder Berry Gordy. They married in 1963, a glamorous pairing that symbolized the unity of music royalty. But within a few short years, Marvin's wandering eye and self-destructive tendencies took hold. Late-night studio sessions gave way to extramarital affairs. Drugs dulled his empathy. Anna, once proud to stand by his side, found herself watching her husband self-implode while flaunting new lovers, some barely out of their teens. By the mid-70s, Marvin was openly involved with Janice Hunter, a woman nearly 20 years his junior. The betrayal wasn't hidden, it was public, relentless, and cruel. Anna's heartbreak wasn't just personal, it was professional humiliation. As a Motown executive and Marvin's spouse, she was now an unwilling participant in a soap opera she never auditioned for. When Anna filed for divorce, the settlement included Gaye's 1978 album, Hear My Dear, a painfully raw, often sarcastic chronicle of their failed marriage. He poured every ounce of guilt, anger, and deflection into vinyl. Critics were confused. Anna was devastated. Despite later reconciliations and brief moments of warmth, the damage was lasting. Marvin's spiral continued, fueled by cocaine, paranoia, and isolation. He was shot and killed by his own father in 1984, just one day before his 45th birthday. Anna lived quietly after his death, rarely speaking publicly about the wounds he left behind. She never remarried. To the world, Marvin Gaye was a tortured genius, but to Anna Gordy, he was a man who shattered her dignity and then turned her pain into a musical product. Percy Sledge. Percy Sledge's voice made hearts melt. With his timeless 1966 classic, When a Man Loves a Woman, he became a global ambassador of romance. His delivery was hauntingly sincere, a man laying his soul bare in every note. But behind the poetic lyrics was a personal life that told a much harsher story. At the height of his fame, Sledge married Rosalie Rosa Singleton, a woman who had known him before the adoration before the stage lights. She was quiet and deeply loyal, the kind of partner who believed love could weather any storm. But love alone wasn't enough to hold back the tides of temptation. As Percy toured internationally and soaked in the applause, he increasingly indulged in the perks of fame. Groupies followed, long absences stretched into weeks, whispers turned into proof. Rosalie, once the center of his universe, became a footnote in his public life. One affair in particular, exposed by the press in the early 70s, was the breaking point. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was humiliating. The man whose voice defined devotion had quietly desecrated his own vows. Rosa stayed for a time, hoping for change, but the loneliness grew unbearable. By the end of the decade, she filed for divorce and disappeared from the public eye. Percy continued to tour and perform, his voice undiminished, but his credibility as a man of love took a hit among those who knew the real story. Though he never spoke openly about his failed marriage, the emotional fallout lingered. Rosalie never gave interviews, never retaliated publicly, never shared her side. But friends close to the family revealed that the heartbreak cut deep. She had given everything to a man whose fame devoured his humility. Percy Sledge made the world believe in love, but in his own home he left a woman to raise children with a broken heart and unanswered questions. Solomon Burke. Solomon Burke was known as the king of rock and soul, a preacher-turned-performer whose rich baritone and velvet swagger defined the genre in the 60s and 70s. Hits like Cry to Me and Everybody Needs Somebody to Love cemented his legacy as a vocal powerhouse. But away from the microphone, Burke's personal life was the stuff of tabloid legend. He married Doris Williams in the early 1960s, a woman who supported his career and stood beside him through his rise. But as Solomon's profile grew, so did the chaos in his private world. He lived like royalty and saw no problem building a harem of romantic entanglements beyond his marriage. By his own admission, Solomon fathered 21 children with multiple women, many of whom he supported financially. The number itself became a media sensation, earning him more notoriety than most of his music in later years. For Doris, the constant waves of betrayal weren't just humiliating, they were soul-crushing. Arguments at home became routine. The stress of raising children under the cloud of public infidelity eventually pushed Doris to her breaking point. By the 1980s, the marriage had collapsed entirely. She walked away exhausted from the emotional roller coaster, seeking peace beyond his orbit. Burke, meanwhile, continued to perform with unmatched charisma, often seated on a golden throne during live shows clad in regal capes. The theatrics masked a life of excess and controversy. Despite the fractured relationships, many of his children would later appear alongside him at concerts or public appearances. Yet the family was undeniably fractured, torn between affection and unresolved pain. When Solomon died in 2010 at age 70, he left behind not just a musical legacy, but a complicated web of children, ex-partners, and unanswered questions. Doris, his most faithful partner, never became part of the spotlight again. For all his power and voice, Burke lost the one woman who had believed in his kingdom before it turned to dust: Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett's raspy, explosive vocals on hits like In the Midnight Hour and Mustang Sally captured the wild urgency of 1960s soul. On stage, he was pure electricity, fearless, unapologetic, unforgettable. But behind the spotlight, Pickett struggled with inner demons that tore apart his personal life and nearly destroyed him. In the late 60s, Pickett married Bonnie Covington, a woman known for her elegance and quiet strength. At first, their relationship seemed promising, two young lovers rising through the era's social turbulence. But as Pickett's fame soared, so did his volatility. Alcohol became a constant companion, and his behavior grew erratic, even violent. Friends and family noticed the shift. Pickett's charm faded behind a growing temper, unpredictable outbursts, and an inability to manage stress without lashing out. Bonnie bore the brunt of it. In 1972, after a particularly violent altercation, she was hospitalized, bruised, and shaken. The incident shocked those close to them, but it barely made a ripple in the press. Still, Bonnie stayed for years, believing he might return to the man she fell for. But the cycle of apologies and explosions never ended. By the late 1970s, she had endured enough and filed for divorce. It was a quiet exit from a very loud storm. Wilson's career declined as his personal life unraveled further. He faced multiple arrests, including for assault and drunk driving. Despite brief attempts at recovery and musical comebacks, the damage was deep professionally and personally. When Pickett died in 2006 at age 64, tributes poured in for the soul pioneer. Yet Bonnie never spoke publicly. Those close to her say she carried emotional scars long after their marriage ended. Pickett's voice helped define a generation, but the same fire that fueled his artistry also consumed the peace in his home. He sang with passion, but lived with rage. Eddie Levert. Eddie Levert, lead singer of the legendary OJs, helped shape the sound of 70s R&B with anthems like Love Train and Backstabbers. His voice inspired unity and hope, but behind the grooves and harmonies, Levert's marriage was quietly collapsing under the weight of choices he couldn't undo. He married Raquel Levert at the peak of his career, a time when the OJs were international sensations, and his presence commanded every stage he touched. Raquel was intelligent, graceful, and dedicated not only as a wife, but as a grounding force behind the fame. At first, their bond appeared unshakable, but as the group toured across continents, Eddie's fidelity wavered. Long absences turned into unanswered phone calls, and rumors of affairs trickled back home. At first, Raquel tried to ignore the whispers, choosing to focus on raising their children and maintaining a sense of normalcy. But the truth grew undeniable. Multiple affairs weren't just moral failures. They eroded the trust and dignity Raquel once held in her husband. She endured the humiliation quietly, not seeking tabloids or sympathy. Behind closed doors, arguments became frequent, emotions frayed, and love slowly withered. By the late 1980s, Raquel made the painful decision to end the marriage. She left not out of hate, but self-preservation, choosing peace over chaos. Eddie, by then, was fully consumed by his career, perhaps unaware of how much damage had been done until it was too late. Though the breakup never became public scandal, it was well known within the industry. The contrast between Eddie's romantic stage persona and his private indiscretions cast a shadow over his legacy for those who knew the real story. Eddie Levert continued to perform, beloved by fans for his soulful delivery. But behind the curtain was a man who had once sung about unity while letting his own household fall apart. The heartbreak wasn't loud, but it was lasting. Barry White. Barry White's velvet voice was the sound of seduction. With timeless tracks like Can't Get Enough of Your Love, Babe, and You're the First, the Last, My Everything. He became an emblem of romance across the globe. Millions adored him for the passion in his lyrics, but his own household told a different story. In 1974, Barry married Glodian James, a singer from the group Love Unlimited. Together they appeared to be a power couple, harmonizing on stage and raising a blended family behind the scenes. But as White's career soared, his attention shifted from the home to the spotlight. Endless touring business ventures and studio sessions became his world. Glodian, meanwhile, struggled with his growing absence and whispers of infidelity. Rumors of Barry's relationships with backup singers and industry insiders made their way back to her. Though she remained composed publicly, the emotional toll was immense. Arguments behind closed doors grew more frequent, especially during the 1980s, when Barry's lifestyle became more extravagant and detached. By 1988, the tension was too thick to ignore. Glodian filed for divorce, ending a 14-year union marred by neglect and unspoken wounds. Despite public statements about mutual respect, those close to the couple knew the split stemmed from deep, unresolved pain. Barry continued to record and tour, and while his health began to decline in the 90s, his romantic image never faded, though many now saw it as ironic. He passed away in 2003 at age 58, leaving behind a massive musical legacy, but also a trail of emotional fallout rarely discussed. Glodian never vilified him, but she never returned either. Barry White sang about eternal love, but at home he couldn't sustain the intimacy his songs so beautifully described. Rick James. Rick James was funk royalty, flamboyant, defiant, and wildly gifted. His hit Super Freak turned him into a pop culture phenomenon. But his love life, particularly with partner Tanya Hijazi, was a tragic and violent roller coaster that would ultimately destroy both their lives in different ways. Tanya entered Rick's world in the early 1990s, during the tail end of his commercial success, but the peak of his drug-fueled madness. Cocaine ruled his days, paranoia shaped his nights, and his relationships became collateral damage. What began as a passionate affair quickly spiraled into control rage and physical brutality. In 1993, the couple was arrested for a horrifying incident in a Los Angeles hotel, where Tanya was allegedly held against her will, burned with a hot pipe, and severely beaten. The case shocked the entertainment world and marked a turning point in James's public image from eccentric genius to violent predator. Rick was convicted in 1994 and served over 2 years in prison. Tanya stood by him, even marrying him shortly after his release. But forgiveness didn't mean healing. The psychological damage lingered, and the relationship never fully recovered. Though James tried to make a musical comeback, the industry and the world had moved on. He died in 2004 at age 56, his health wrecked by years of excess and abuse. Tanya has rarely spoken in depth about the ordeal, but court documents and public records revealed enough to leave fans horrified. The man who once defined cool and charisma had become a symbol of unchecked fame and unrepentant violence. Rick James's story isn't just about a love gone wrong. It's a brutal reminder of how talent and toxicity can coexist in the same body, and how even the most confident showman can collapse under the weight of his own destruction. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass had the kind of voice that made arenas tremble and hearts surrender. Known for hits like Love TKO and Close the Door, he was the definition of seductive soul. But behind the allure was a private life marred by reckless decisions and devastating consequences. In the 1980s, Teddy married Karen Still, a woman of resilience and grace. At first, their relationship radiated hope. Karen stood by him as he transitioned from lead singer of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes to a solo superstar. But with fame came temptation, and Teddy indulged. Tours became opportunities for affairs, and fame fed his ego while eroding the loyalty that had grounded him. Their marriage was already on shaky ground when tragedy struck. In 1982, Teddy was involved in a horrific car crash in Philadelphia that left him paralyzed from the chest down. Rumors swirled about who was in the car and why, adding fuel to the fire of his already complex image. While Karen supported his recovery publicly, the emotional strain behind closed doors intensified. Despite his efforts to reclaim a sense of normalcy returning to recording and advocacy work, Teddy's past infidelities and the new challenges of his condition strained their bond to its limits. The emotional toll of being both partner and caretaker proved overwhelming. By 2002, after years of tension and heartache, Karen filed for divorce. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was a quiet admission that love alone couldn't repair what betrayal and trauma had torn apart. Teddy died in 2010 at the age of 59. While fans celebrated his resilience and music, Karen's silent departure from his life remained a painful chapter, an unseen wound in the story of a man whose songs celebrated love even as he failed to protect it. R. Kelly. R. Kelly was once a king of contemporary R&B. With songs like I Believe I Can Fly and Bump and Grind, he dominated charts and redefined the genre. But while his music soared, his private life spiraled into controversy, leaving a trail of damaged lives and shattered trust, including that of the women he once called wives. In 1994, the music world was shaken when it was revealed that R. Kelly had secretly married rising star Aaliyah, who was only 15 at the time. The illegal union, annulled quickly under pressure from her family, was the beginning of a long pattern of disturbing behavior hidden beneath Kelly's celebrity sheen. 2 years later, he married Andrea Lee, later known as Andrea Kelly, a dancer who believed she had found love behind the stage curtain. But the marriage soon turned into a nightmare. Andrea would later detail years of emotional manipulation, isolation, and physical violence, locked rooms, surveillance, and a life lived in fear. Though she remained silent publicly for years, the pain was building. In 2005, Andrea left Kelly after a violent incident she could no longer endure. Their divorce was finalized in 2009. What followed was a reckoning. Survivors began to speak. Lawsuits mounted. And in 2019, the documentary series Surviving R. Kelly exposed his decades-long pattern of abuse to the world. Once celebrated for his genius, Kelly's name became synonymous with betrayal. He was arrested and later convicted on multiple federal charges, including sex trafficking and racketeering. Andrea, who once stood silently beside him, emerged as one of the most credible voices in holding him accountable. R. Kelly's fall wasn't just about the law, it was about the women he deceived, manipulated, and hurt. His marriage to Andrea wasn't a love story, it was a warning. The tragedy wasn't only in what he lost, but in the pain he caused trying to keep his secrets hidden. Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown was the rebellious prince of New Jack Swing, a natural showman whose hits like My Prerogative and Every Little Step lit up the charts. But beyond the stage, his love life became one of music's most notorious cautionary tales, centered on his volatile marriage to pop legend Whitney Houston. Their romance began like a whirlwind, two titans of the industry drawn to each other's charisma and intensity. They married in 1992, promising a lifetime of love and loyalty. But almost from the start, the relationship was marked by chaos. Bobby, already battling substance abuse and legal troubles, grew increasingly unstable. Whitney, too, began struggling with addiction, many pointing to their shared habits as a destructive bond. The public watched their unraveling like a slow-moving train wreck. Fights, arrests, rehab stints, and disturbing interviews kept them in the headlines. In 2003, Bobby was charged with battery after a domestic altercation left Whitney with facial injuries, a shocking confirmation of long-rumored abuse. Through it all, they remained entangled emotionally and chemically. Whitney's once pristine image deteriorated while Bobby's music career lost momentum. In 2006, after nearly 14 years of turmoil, she filed for divorce. The final decree came in 2007, granting her full custody of their daughter, Bobby Christina. In 2012, Whitney was found dead in a hotel bathtub, her death ruled an accidental drowning, complicated by heart disease and cocaine use. The world mourned, but many blamed Bobby at least in part for her downfall. Though he has since claimed sobriety and expressed regret, Bobby Brown will always carry the burden of a love that turned poisonous. He didn't just lose a wife, he lost the chance at redemption, and eventually the child they shared. Ne-Yo built a brand around vulnerability, elegance, and emotional transparency. From So Sick to Miss Independent, he crafted ballads that resonated with millions. But while the world saw him as a refined R&B gentleman, his marriage told a far more chaotic tale. In 2016, Ne-Yo married Crystal Renee. Now Crystal Renee, a model and TV personality. Their union was Instagram-worthy. Gorgeous vacations, red carpet appearances, glowing captions about love and family. But behind the curated posts was a man living a double life. Throughout their marriage, Ne-Yo engaged in multiple affairs, some with long-term partners, others casual, all hidden until technology betrayed him. In 2022, Crystal discovered messages, photos, and even children conceived outside their marriage. Rather than suffer in silence, she took to social media and exposed everything, shocking fans and shaking his carefully managed image. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was humiliating on a global stage. In her viral post, Crystal accused him of 8 years of deception, calling herself unknowingly sharing her husband with numerous women who sold their bodies unprotected to him. The public response was swift. Admirers of his romantic lyrics felt betrayed, questioning how someone who wrote about love could show so little of it behind closed doors. Crystal filed for divorce the same year. Ne-Yo responded with a statement asking for privacy, but the damage was irreversible. His name, once synonymous with modern R&B elegance, was now associated with dishonesty and ego-driven recklessness. Though he continues to release music and perform, Ne-Yo's legacy has shifted. The man who once penned anthems of devotion became the subject of scandal, proving that even the most heartfelt lyrics can ring hollow when they're not lived off stage. These stories aren't just about broken relationships, they're about fame's darker side, where love is often the first casualty. From violent tragedies to emotional neglect, these 17 R&B legends lived through heartbreak that money, talent, and success couldn't prevent. But who do you think suffered the greatest loss? Was it the one left behind, or the one who caused the pain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe these untold stories deserve to be heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more powerful journeys through Black music history.